Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of SaaS Showdown. I'm Rose Layton, and this is my partner in crime.
Colin McCarthy, great to be with you for another episode, Rose.
Yeah, of course. And today we are talking about something that gets a lot of attention, but maybe not enough attention in the right places. We are talking about sustainable SaaS.
Sustainability.
Sustainability.
Sustainability. That's it. Yes.
There you go.
That's it. Yeah. Obviously, being green, being environmentally aware is in a lot of corporate media plans, public relation plans, corporate plans, financial plans. A lot of companies claim that they are green, may not necessarily be green. Obviously, John Oliver, if you watch the John Oliver show on YouTube or on HBO here in the US, did an episode a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, about carbon credits and how you can just be carbon neutral by buying somebody else's good practices and offsetting what you've done. And obviously, in the last few months, obviously, this show is recorded at a certain period of time, and then it will be released at another period of time. Currently in the US, we've just had the Hurricane Ian down in Florida, which is obviously a very large climate event. There's been flooding in Bangladesh, and then incredible heat waves in France.
Pakistan.
And was it Pakistan that was the flooding?
It was
Pakistan, Bangladesh. Yeah, I
get that. I guess that's the point, right?
My geography isn't good.
Often.
There has been a lot of these very big climate events, and I don't think, obviously, corporations aren't ignoring it. And a lot of companies will say, oh, we're a green company. We run everything in the cloud. We don't have our own data centers. Mm-hmm. But that's not necessarily true. And a reason today that we brought our friend and other SaaS colleague, Dominik, to come and talk to us today about green computing and being a good SaaS and SaaS ops customer.
Dominik, say a few things about yourself.
Yeah, we are primarily talking about green procurement, actually, because I'm not necessarily the biggest techie, but yeah, I'm the co-founder, chief of vision, kind of my fancy title, of 22D Consulting. We are a Google Workspace partner and primarily focused on, being a sustainable company ourselves. In all four pillars equally, which just for a recap, the human, the social, the economical, and then the environmental part. Today we're talking about the environmental part, but the other ones are impacted by the environmental in ways and forms that are not necessarily obvious. Mm-hmm. So my hashtag on my personal hashtag is SaaS Sustainability. That's what Colin was referring to.
Yes, we nailed it.
Yes, yeah. Dominik's a lot better at pronouncing it than I am. I've got a cough at the moment, and that's my excuse.
All right, so Dominik, tell us about. Where do we start? Obviously, we've talked about, a lot of companies are saying they're green these days, but they're not quite really. There's some companies that are basically buying carbon credits off of other people's good practices instead of having to do their own. So, where do you think what's the low hanging fruit when people are thinking about this?
The low hanging fruit.
Is there any low hanging fruit? It doesn't have to be.
Well, the important bit is for you to know what your footprint is, and that starts at literally knowing who you buy from. It starts at your internal use case with how do you heat your office if you heat it. I'm talking about Germany in 2022. People reduce their heating bills at the office.
Yeah, I would imagine.
How do you heat it? What's your internal footprint? Is something you should know about it.
Right.
And then if you're pushing this out to your employees, with fully remote, that's a similar point. So the low-hanging fruit, I don't know if there is a good point.
Right. I think that's a good place
like,
to start, though, because we've spent a lot of time talking about how important it is to have a good relationship with, the finance teams, the workplace teams, the HR teams. And I think a lot of that cooperation helps with this sort of starting place of knowing what your current footprint is.
Yeah. And achieving sustainability at your company is in multiple facets. If you're in IT and very much focused on IT, is how can you reduce the usage of your devices, unnecessary uses.
Of course.
Say turn on for your meeting rooms, turn on data saver modes and or energy saver modes, and turn your devices off 2 minutes after the people leave the meeting room, and only turn it back on 2 minutes before people join back. That's like the low-hanging fruit everyone in IT could do that has access to control some similar things. But that's just a start, and that's just the scratch of the surface. Like, it is a procurement issue in essence. If
makes sense. If you buy sustainable, you are sustainable.
Yeah.
Well, you're making strides towards it. You're not.
Right.
It is a procurement issue everywhere, and even if you were in like manufacturing, even then you procure energy somehow. And if that's the lowest common denominator for all the companies that we work with, or
everyone's consuming some kind of energy.
It's like energy consumption is the point. And if you're producing, your energy consumption obviously higher, but that also trickles down to your customers.
Right.
And then, the way, if you produce steel, well, how do you get that heat? And getting that heat with electricity is probably currently still impossible. Right. But I don't really talk about those technical details. I'm more on the procurement side, because that's where I, even as a small company, have the ability to affect my vendors.
Right. And so you shared a link with us, and the link is 22d.link/sustainability. And so, Dominik, describe this document for us, maybe how it came about, and then how you use it.
Yeah, so this document is our public procurement document. It's links to Google Doc. You can look at it. You can use it. I put a CC0 on it, steal it, run with it, put it into practice. It covers a lot of bases on the procurement side, especially on the sustainability side. But we also have
you've got
the environmental sustainability
down
side.
There at the bottom.
We've got security there at the bottom, which well, that's just like I use SOC 2 and that's fine for me. But the bit that's really important, on the top we start with like equity and inclusion as well. Is your tool, which then adds on the sustainability side for social and human justice. But the primary part that we want to talk about is the headline that is coming under the regeneration and sustainability, where the very first headline below that is like, show us your numbers, and that's really what we're looking for. The rest is just how you get to that point, and how we get our vendors to that point. We really want to see, I
was going to say, so how do we make sense of those numbers? Because, back in the day when we had data centers and we had our Exchange servers and our file servers running in the data center, we would know that we were, using X kilowatts of power per rack because that's what the data center was charging us. Now that everybody has, everybody who isn't completely crazy has moved to Office 365 or Google Workspace and not managing their own on-premise Exchange servers. But then if you look at like cloud.google.com // sustainability, they have a page that lists what their cloud sustainability, practices are, and they have a whole bunch of percentage of how much waste is diverted from landfills, etc., and how much is renewable. And I know that Microsoft have a similar thing for, Azure, which obviously powers Office 365. So what should we and what should other people be looking for, and how do we choose? Like I did a Google search. Maybe I should have done a whatever the Bing search to try and see which one is better, Google Cloud or Azure, which one is greener, and I couldn't find the answer without reading hundreds of white pages or white papers and other documents.
Yeah, so those pages are fine, but they're not what you're looking for. So those sustainability pages, like if you don't have them, well, don't bother with them in that way. But those pages, if in a perfect world, I would use the right, and that's right based on science. It's a company out of Germany approach of using XDC, the X degree compatibility model. It's hard to get those numbers at this point from companies, but that's how many degrees are you compatible with the Paris Climate Accord? Mm-hmm. And everything, if you
that would make things a lot simpler, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no one really should work with CO2 emissions, right? Because that's just too abstract.
Right.
But if you get a number and say, hey, when you use us in this way, you are 1.5 degrees. When you use us in this way, you're in more excessive numbers. You're on a 2 degree, and you can also be on a 0 or negative degrees, and then you work towards actually reducing the impact of
and that would give a lot more company. Like apples to apples comparison between these various types of procurement. Yeah. I guess, have you seen that trending? Like obviously the Paris Climate Accord in like historical perspective is relatively new. And then the concept of sort of, numerizing it, and distilling it down to degrees of separation from it, is even newer. And so do you see a good trend in that direction, or do we still have a long way to go?
We have a very long way to go. The reason for that is that the company, is mostly working with financial services companies, investment firms, etc., to ensure that their portfolios are like compatible with the Paris Accord. Okay.
So it just hasn't branched out to other industries much.
Yeah, it sadly doesn't have really branched out. So we still are stuck with CO2, and then measuring what we're currently using, how we can reduce that, what we can do with our code. If you're a SaaS founder, there are a couple of good resources that we have in that document as well. And then the region picker and the cloud carbon footprint tooling, where you then have an overview. It's an open source tool. Where you then have an overview over the three major infrastructure providers, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And then you can see how your multi-cloud strategy can affect your CO2 emissions. And some services may be greener at one provider than at the other one. And if the technology doesn't really care what you use, well, then you can shift around on that side.
That's true, because like basically two very similar SaaS companies, both using, let's say, AWS, right, could be structuring their services in very different ways to create very different outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And there is ways to see, like, if you have batch programming, of batch jobs that you run, there is a way to see, hey, on which data center you're really running it. Is it currently sunny there, or is it at least daylight there? And then you could run your batch job during that time and have the more of a confidence that you're actually using solar energy rather than something else, coal, if you're in Germany.
So you have included in this link, you have included some of the contractual language that you use with the vendors that you procure. So let's talk about that conversation a little. Obviously you're requiring 22D is requiring that vendors measure their carbon footprint and that they take steps to offset it. Talk to us about how strict those requirements are.
Yeah.
What that conversation looks like.
And also some examples of the vendors. Obviously, being a SaaS company
we can
yourself,
name names here. It's fine.
You're talking about other SaaS companies, whether it's Zoom, Lucidchart, Miro, Reich, any of the other, Echo, Sign, or DocuSign, or any of those applications, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so we have 4 requirements that are in that contractual clause that is also linked in that document. The first part is measuring, and that's all 3, if not 4 scopes. There is a secret 4th scope if you if you want to Google about that. And then firstly, we want to have you evaluate and implement measures to reduce your footprint. We really don't want you to offset.
That makes sense, right? The first step should be to try to reduce your footprint as much as you can.
Yeah. And you can only do that if you know your numbers. And then the next step is compensation. Once you have reduced as much as possible, you have to compensate. And then the 4th step is implementing sustainability measures to ensure that you're in the environmental, social, and corporate side sustainable, and improve and include those in the future processes. Okay. But we really want you to reduce your your CO2 footprint by potentially not running that big ML code just to run some better advertisements.
Well, so I guess what's the reaction to those things? I mean, that's a lot of work, I think, for a company that hasn't started doing anything.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's an ongoing thing. It's not just one and done, check box,
you can't
I've
check
done
this
it. We're
when
good.
you sign the contract and then just...
Yeah, we're good for another year. Let's not worry about it. This seems like it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing thing with our vendors. Every renewal discussion comes up again, if not sooner. We signed a new deal with our payroll provider, a brand new deal with our payroll provider. I was like, I'm not signing this until I get at least something into the contract. And then that was one sentence in the preamble, so literally nothing. But it was at least something. We got people to agree that this is important. And then we moved forward when they said, "Hey, we're moving from a main service agreement into standard contractual clauses, like tick box and done contractual clause." I'm like, "Cool. If you want me on these, don't you? I'll stay on the old ones, except if you get me the new ones, plus the contractual clause." And then you talk to sales, and sales yeah, that's not my point. I don't want to.
Salespeople are like, this is not me.
Legal, and then, yeah. always goes into legal, and I'm saying no, legal is the wrong people. You really don't want legal involved. Well, you do, but I'll get into that in a second.
I found
you want leadership and the C-level leadership, or at least someone higher up on the business side involved, because they do that exactly right thing.
Yeah, so I am starting to see a lot more organizations having sustainability officers, whether it's somebody that has a C-level title or somebody who's VP and above that is responsible for sustainability, because it is a very important corporate aspect. And obviously for you and for everybody else, they're the people to connect into with those companies, or to work with. If you're in the IT department, connect with your sustainability officer and bring them on board when it comes to negotiating those contracts, etc. So I have a question, and maybe you don't know the answer. Maybe you can give your opinion or thoughts. With a growing number of us trying to be more aware of this when we're buying SaaS services, if the latest whizbang.io app that everybody is using is running on coal powered data centers, who is actually going to care or look into that? Because they just want the whizbang.io app that all of their user base are using to do whatever it does and to keep them happy and productive. Are they really going to be looking behind that curtain to see where the processing power is actually coming from?
That slightly depends. If you're in a B2B environment, the end users of that secondary B2B, that is a B2C customer now, they don't really care about that second level. Not necessarily, at least. While the consumers care about the direct outputs. So consumers are not necessarily aware that their technology usage produces CO2. They know that their technology themselves is producing waste, energy consumption for the production, but they don't think.
Right. I think a lot of consumers don't really consider software when they think about their own green footprint.
Yeah. And their footprint is really minimal in general. We don't really need to talk about those end users as a group of actual people to change anything, because it's the corporations. Honestly, end users can do whatever they want and they can keep doing what they want.
It won't matter. As a business, though,
it does not matter.
That the best that we can do is use our position as people who make decisions about procurement and things like that to help both our company be sustainable, right? Which if we're serving consumers, it's going to make them more sustainable. But it also, by requiring our vendors to be more sustainable, we're sort of pushing that upstream. Yeah. Okay.
What I'm going to suggest to the world, and it would be brilliant if we did this, is if we had a grading system. Like when you go into the supermarket and you pick up your product, it has all the ingredients. And in some countries, it will give you like a green, red, yellow, whatever color, saying how good that food is for you in certain things. We have the same thing if you go into a restaurant. I know they have them in Europe. I know they have them in North America. You will get a health grade of that restaurant often posted in the window.
Right.
Maybe we need the same thing on applications that we purchase. There is an ingredients listing. This whizbang.io app contains this much carbon or this much electricity, or does X, Y, and Z. And it's a grade. Maybe that's an easy way of of the consumers, not only us as business people, but as you were saying, Dominik, to the consumers, the end users, it's not something that's visible or they think about.
Right. Yeah.
And they shouldn't.
They don't need to.
It's not their
fault. But I think
it's not their fault. They care. Yeah. They care about buying sustainable. Like there is a reason. There is a framework web laptop. There is a reason. There is the Fairphone, even though I don't yet consider it a valuable option on the market because of their software side support. It's not as long as an iPhone, for example. But there is reasons why these brands exist because consumers want them.
It doesn't matter as much as what we as businesses.
It doesn't matter for them to change. Yeah, it's always the business side that needs to do, and if it's sometimes the customer requiring it. Yeah,
in this case,
an incentive
I think
for you.
If the end user, if the consumer in this case is like one of our employees, and they want the latest whatever, right? If you have a commitment to sustainability as a company and you are taking steps to require your vendors to measure and offset and reduce and all of that, like in theory, right? That the employee that wants the brand new shiny thing, you can just say no. You can. But I mean, that's part of where it comes to getting everybody sort of invested in the mission, right? Like we as IT people can start the conversation, but we ultimately don't own it. It has to be with buy-in from top levels of leadership. You're very lucky, Dominik. You kind of get to say whatever you want goes at 22D because it's your baby. But Colin and I are not in quite the same position.
I know but you are in a position to influence colleagues. You're in position to educate the teams, your teams. You're in your position to educate your employees about sustainable usage of their devices and make them aware that if they care in the company, that their decisions in other parts of your business are also impacting.
And we do have a fair impact
the
on
only
the procurement
reason why
process.
it's important.
Like we are usually pretty standard partners in procurement. So whether you have an IT procurement team or you work in cohesion with a group of people with legal and all of that, like we have the ability to say, hey, like I had an idea, like can we try to get sustainability language in our contracts? And that's definitely a conversation that we're able to start.
Yes, and if you were able to set KPIs, maybe put that into your next performance review, and say, hey, if you want to score points to get promoted in my team, think more about how you can improve your code to use less CO2. Also saves you money, by the way.
It saves you money in addition. Efficiency in a lot of ways is like the precursor to sustainability, right? And running an efficient business is just the starting point for becoming sustainable. And that's part of that reduce category. You don't need to measure to make your things more efficient necessarily.
You don't need to measure the entire thing.
You need to measure the little parts. But I think most people know right off the top of their head what's not running efficiently, right? What's taking more resources than it's giving back. And so that can be an easy place to start.
Yeah. And I'm running a 16 or 32 gigabyte virtual machine every day for 24/7. That's just running a GAM script like 4 GAM scripts, and it's every night, and that's it. But there is reasons why it's scaled this way, because sometimes I need it that size. Like I could run it on a slower machine and then shut off the bigger one up and down, but that introduces complexity that my brain doesn't want to handle.
Ease of use often wins, doesn't it?
Well,
when you're not
I think the
considering
point is it's not about being perfect. It's about trying. Right? If we don't try, nothing happens. If we try at least a little bit, then we can even shave off a few points. Right? They're talking about like global temperature increase over the next few decades, and like, you know, we can shave off like 0.1.
Maybe
matters.
This isn't the best. Maybe this isn't the best analogy, but it's an iceberg that we need to chip away at. So
that's a terrible analogy. It's a terrible analogy.
I know. But you have to chip away at it a bit at a time. But maybe don't chip away at the iceberg, because we don't want the icebergs to melt. But you get the idea. It's a huge problem, but you have to tackle it. And if you're only one person or one company tackling it with one vendor, somebody else will be that one person tackling one vendor, and eventually you will get some change, because it's how things happen. So I think this has been a great 30-minute discussion. Any last closing thoughts, Dominik?
Just tell your customer, your vendors to put it in every conversation, and even it's like just a question, hey, what's your number? And if you ask it every time and in every conversation, someone will tell you, someone will tell their business team, hey, we're getting these questions a lot. And then even if you don't put in language into your contract, because both legal teams, their core job is to protect the business. And that's kind of, obviously putting in additional language makes it harder for them. But if you ask, and if if the sales teams that you talk to buy stuff hear it way too often, they will at some point end up talking to higher ups and saying, hey, this is important to our customers. And
everything is going to go down in that CRM system, CMS system, all of those conversations.
And I guess even if it's not salespeople, you can talk to your CSMs and your account executives for your existing contracts, and do the same thing, right? Every time you talk to them, mention it, and then they'll bring it up as a customer concern.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining us, Dominik. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Another riveting discussion.
We
will post some links. Obviously, like this is on video for some of you, it's audio for others. We'll post some links in the description on the YouTube channel and on the podcast if we can. And we'll put them on the podcast website as well. So
and it was just 22d.link/sustainability.
Sustainability,
not sustainability.
Yes. Not sustainability, sustainability.
Both work.
Yes.
Good. They both work.
I can promise.
They both work.
Beautiful.
If we use the word enough, it will end up in the English dictionary.
That's true.
You just got to keep using the words.
Just got to keep doing it. Just like SaaS ops, right, Colin?
Yes, SaaS ops. Yeah.
It's different to the French people who did prescribed language.
Well, thanks again. It has been great. And we'll see you next everybody time. Again next time for another episode of SaaS Showdown.
Produced by the Tab Geeks Network. Enjoy all of our shows on YouTube at youtube.com/tabgeeks. Join our exclusive, free, no sponsors allowed Slack community and sign up for our newsletter at tabgeeks.com.